Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir Al-Azouzi from easymedicaldevice.com, and today we'll talk about real world evidence. So I'm sure you heard about that, or also about the acronym real world data, or RWE or RWD. And this is mainly what we will try to debunk today. Even me, I learned things when I made those research here, so which is also great because we are all here to learn. So here now what we are trying to do is mainly to understand how to use this acronym real world evidence specifically for Europe and FDA, because to be honest, it's the same thing but it has different purposes, if I can say. So let's try to debunk that. So mainly what we are trying to do today. So let me verify my notes. We'll verify what it is mainly meaning for FDA and for the European Commission and notified bodies. And we'll also explore what real world data or real world evidence actually means in both regions, the regulatory context, so why FDA and EU are pushing for it. So yeah, it's also something that is interesting because there is some push for that, and we discussed also about that. And I think maybe if you followed the episode that is talking about the highlights from the conference of la rentrée du DM in France, we had those data or real world data that were used there. We'll talk also about the main challenges manufacturers are facing using the real-world evidence, how we can build a compliant real-world evidence strategy for both markets, so Europe and FDA again, and finally the practical difference you must manage if you want your data accepted on both sides of the Atlantic. So okay, let's start that. And before to start, so if you are listening on the podcast on or YouTube or the platforms like I can't remember the platform name, so like Spotify, like Google Podcasts or whatever, please just subscribe to it. And if you can put a review, it can be really great because mainly this helps also to be distributed to more people. And if you have some people also that may be interested by this podcast, don't hesitate also to share that with your colleagues. I'm sure they will be happy for that. So let's look at real world evidence. Okay, so first let's start to understand what is real world evidence and why is it so trending. So people are really talking about that. Maybe you never heard about it, sorry for that, but it's a trend. So and I learned also something because I was also mixing up the terms real world data and real world evidence, and I was like not really understanding the difference, and now I understand it and I will try to explain that to you. So first, if we look at real world data, so mainly this is the initial phase is real world data and the second phase is real world evidence. So you need the first one first and then you move to the second one. So first we do the real world data, which is mainly a collection of information that are traditionally outside the clinical trials. So it is, for example, electronic health records, claims data for your device, the registries, also the device usage logs, and also for wearables like watches or whatever, all the data that are collected by the sensors. So these are the data, real world data, so data coming from the real world, and mainly this is that. And how you move from real world data to real world evidence. So you have a real world evidence is mainly that you have to use the real world data to create some clinical evidence out of it. So real world data is more like the raw data coming from whatever source. Real world evidence is just the process of transforming them to clinical evidence for your device. So this is mainly the thing that is really important to understand, that you have to then go through this process to obtain real world evidence. So real world evidence is that you are really working to filter, to update, to do the things that are really there. So we say it's trending because more and more now we have some authorities that are pushing for that, and FDA is one of them. So FDA mainly, they are asking to gather those data because with the multiplication of electronic devices, all those sensors that we have, those watches, those even the phone that can measure your step or whatever, with all those, we have a huge number of data that is now flooding to us, which the authorities understood that mainly you cannot work as before. You cannot just wait for clinical trials to provide information and it's sufficient. No, the real world data that are collected by those devices can also be another source of information. It should be understood that it's complementary. It's not like only that to be used, but it's complementary to what you already have within the market. So FDA, around 2016, they had embraced, if I can say, real world data with this 21st Century Cures Act. I have to read that. I haven't read it, sorry. Which meant, since it's published, so mainly we are really pushing real world evidence. And the objective is, as I said, the objective is to collect data that are outside of this circuit that you already know, that, as I said, clinical trial. Under EU MDR, so we don't call it real world evidence, but mainly if we have to find parallel for it, it should be the post-marketing clinical follow-up. So mainly we have already the device on the market, and now we are still collecting data from this device to confirm that the device is working and is still safe. So mainly this is, I think, how you will have to understand that. But the objective for both is like to have a continuous generation of data from multiple sources. So it's more like I don't need to wait for a clinical trial to gather data. No, I gather them outside of clinical trial, but those data will help me to continuously show that everything is still working for my device. Okay, so now what is the problem with those real-world evidence? So mainly, this is the misuse made by manufacturers. It's why it's important to have this podcast and to maybe make some education here. So if you are listening to some manufacturers, they think that the real-world evidence is mainly all the data that they already have, like compliance, like registry data, or like all data that they have, and they think that it's enough. Just I have those data. I have already those data, so why should I go and collect many more data? So this is mainly the problem. And if you now look at FDA and EU, they are rejecting always, every day, if I can say, submissions due to this misunderstanding. Why? Because your data, you should use data sets that are traceable and auditable. So if you gather data that you don't know where it's coming from and that you cannot really audit and ask questions about it, it's not possible to use that. There are also some data that you are collecting, but you are not defining before to collect those data the endpoints. Why are you collecting those data? And it's one thing that we discussed during the conference or Rentrée du DM. I think if I remember, I have to remember now. One person said, I haven't put the endpoints before because I didn't know what I would find after, if I can say that, because they were, I think, if I remember, they were gathering patients' information, so electronic information from patients. So what they said, let's first look at what we are collecting, and then we will define the endpoints after. So apparently it works for them, but it was really a lot of work because they had to find a match between all the data that they have collected and filter them correctly, store them, and find all the data. And then after that, they say, okay, now we can go with the endpoints and do those endpoints because we know that it will be matching with the end data. But we have some people that are just collecting data, sharing them without really linking them to real endpoints. So best practice, it's really to start with the endpoints and then to go to the data. But as I said, we have some tricks. And I remember at that moment, people were, the person that was mentioning that was a bit laughing because it's normally not like that, but we had to do it like that, otherwise it would not have passed. So it was a bit. It was about retrospective data instead of prospective, because they were planning to do prospective, but they went for retrospective. Others is also the mixing of data, of uncontrolled data, biased data, with no statistical justification. So you mix multiple types of data of different origin, and you think that it's fine because here we had 20 patients, here we had 12 patients here. So we mix all those things. No, you have also to define some, verify first, as I've said, where it's coming from, traceable, etc. And also if it's controlled data or not, you know many information about it, but also if statistically it's fine, it's justified. And you cannot just take data from everywhere and mix them and say, oh, we have now data. So it's also some error that people are doing. And mainly also the common mistake that people are doing, because they think, oh, we already have, as I've said, data. Let's use them as real world evidence. So then they think this is sufficient and they don't need to do a clinical trial. And this is one of the big mistakes also. The regulators usually, if you can have, maybe you can have real world evidence as sufficient, but usually they use real world evidence as an additional complement to other data like clinical trials or other things that you are getting. So try to have multiple sources of data coming from different routes which arrive to the same point to prove safety and performance mainly of your device. So saying that, the role of a QA/RA person should be to find, if I can say, a pool of data and to sort it and to clean it to make it regulatory graded. So mainly it's nice, or it's clean, if I can say, for presenting that to regulatory authorities. And this is a challenge that quality and regulatory affairs people do have, because some companies, they are trying to take some shortcuts and it's not working. So FDA or EU notified bodies will stop you for that because they see that there is no coherence with the data that you are collecting.
Meet Alex. He needs to create an electronic instruction for use. With EasyIFU, he uploads the document and in just a second gets a QR code. The code is printed on the packaging and shipped with the product. The user receives it, scan it, and the IFU appears fast and always up to date. Simple, fast, paperless. EasyIFU, the smart way to manage your IFUs.
Okay, so let's start with the FDA. So we'll do Europe just after. Let's start with the FDA first. So mainly the FDA, as I've said, defines the real-world evidence as data, as clinical evidence mainly. So it's real-world data that you are taking and then analyzing to create some clinical evidence for your products. Now, the FDA is actively encouraging you to use real-world evidence when it's, how they call it, fit for purpose, mainly that it's relevant, reliable, and sufficient, of sufficient quality. They are also collecting the data. You have also to collect the data using a methodology. So as I said, it's not like you are just finding data everywhere and just collect it and use it. No, it's like we have a methodology to collect those data. And it's why we collected those data in a certain way also. And you have to transparently analyze those data. So you have to provide a full explanation of how you have analyzed the data and why you arrived to such conclusion. So FDA will accept your real-world evidence when you are submitting it for pre-market, like 510K, De Novo, or PMA. Also, it's important for label expansion. So mainly, for example, you have a device that was scoped only to do a certain thing and you want to add a new claim or new population, whatever, and then it's doing a lot of things. You can use those real world evidence to then prove that this device is also fit for this extension, if I can say. You can also use that for post-approval studies. So when there is a long-term follow-up or safety monitoring that you are doing, so you can also use those data to prove that mainly your device is still working correctly. So for example, we had a cardiovascular device company that mainly used the data, collected the national data about their device and used it to expand the indication to the infant or young population mainly. So mainly they use that to expand, to say now my device can be used to children, and they didn't have made a clinical trial for that. They just use real world evidence because they collected already those data in a certain manner. It's reliable with a certain methodology. It's analyzed transparently, etc., etc. So you know now how it's working. So what are the key requirements? So there is a guidance. I don't know if I can put it maybe on the show notes, but the name is FDA's. So it's in 2023. It's a draft guidance. Use of real-world evidence to support regulatory decisions making for medical devices. So this guidance is mainly listing the requirements or principles that you have to follow. So there are 4. The first is data relevance. So does it? You have to answer this question. Does it answer the clinical question? So is it relevant? As I said, you are not collecting data to answer another question, the question that you want to ask mainly. The second point, principle is the data reliable? So is it complete, consistent, and verifiable? The third point is the study design correctly. Do you have designed the study in a certain way, like biased or confounders are addressed, mainly that you are really answering some question, for example, of ethnicity or sex or whatever, that you designed it in a certain way that there is no challenge related to that. And the last one, which we talked already about, is traceability. So can we review those data? Can we understand where it's coming from? Can we understand who is, all the things that are inside? The objective is to audit those data to verify really that everything is transparent and we know really everything about those data, and it's not like you can fake it, traffic it, or make some fraud of it. So mainly this is really something that the FDA is looking for. So in short, mainly the FDA, as we saw, is open-minded to make use of real-world data, real-world evidence for expanding, for submission, etc. But they expect really that it's rigorous, like everything should be clean, should be square, with the right methodology, with everything. So, but if I may summarize, the mindset of the FDA related to real-world evidence is really to accelerate innovation. The objective is to help you to bring innovative products more quickly on the market, because mainly they authorize you to submit that also for pre-submission, and you will see that for Europe is different. So it's why I'm saying that there are some difference with Europe. So yeah, mainly the objective is that you can submit quickly some data to accelerate innovation, but also to be having some scientific credibility to what you are saying. So it's why they are really rigorous about that, but they are really pushing you to use real-world evidence. Okay, so now let's cross the Atlantic and go to Europe. As I've told you, it's different for Europe. So if you were happy of what I just mentioned to you for FDA, you'll not be happy maybe for Europe. So what I can say is that the principle of real-world evidence, as we said before, is not explicitly mentioned anywhere on the MDR. So what we can translate it is clinical data or post-marketing clinical follow-up, which I hope you know about now. If you don't know, so we have also some episode of the podcast talking about that. So where then the real-world evidence is fitting? Mainly it's fitting for post-market validation, safety, and for verification of safety and performance. Mainly you validate that yes, your device is safe and performant. It's also for because when you are doing those post-marketing clinical follow-up, the objective is also to justify the risk, so verify the risk. So mainly here is like also to verify if there is any emerging risks that are coming. So with those data, this is also used for updating your clinical evaluation report and to support any renewal or significant changes. So mainly this is data used for that. So in other words, the FDA is accepting real-world evidence for pre-market, but Europe is strictly accepting that for post-market. So because many pre-market, you cannot test your device on patients while the device is not approved outside a clinical trial. So it's why it's only post-market that you can use that. I mean, if you know how to use real-world evidence during that, I mean, tell me. I would be happy to list that. I mean, list that also as a methodology inside the creation of your clinical evaluation report for pre-submission. But usually it's post-market that mainly we are collecting those data. So which data then can you collect about? Is about post-marketing surveillance, post-marketing clinical follow-up surveys or observational studies, registries and hospital database, device usage logs and remote monitoring data, so as the same as before, and scientific literature and real-world clinical studies. So it's a bit limited, as we mentioned, in comparison to the US. They are mainly linking, as I said, those real-world evidence to post-marketing surveillance plan, post-PMCF plan, clinical evaluation plan. So many that are linking those documents to it. So the data that you are collecting mainly, as I said, is really a feedback for your clinical evaluation report, your PSUR, all those reports that you are creating out of PMS and the PMCF and the clinical evaluation. So in Europe, as we said, the real-world evidence are really an ongoing mechanism for compliance. So mainly, is my device still fine, still working? So I'm using data that I'm collecting through different sources to confirm to the authorities that yes, my device is still working as I've defined. It's like when you are pre-market, you are saying, I guess, because it's a lot of guesses, that my device will do like this or like that. That will be perfect. It will work at 90%, etc., etc. Now, with real-world evidence, you can prove it because it's really coming really from the market. I mean, it's like having a laboratory and testing something on laboratory, and now you test it in the real world. You may have some differences. So here, and this is the game, you have to prove it's the same. So this is mainly the trick, if I can say, related to this. So yeah, be careful of that. So I have tried to define a strategy because I know that when you are listening to that, you say, oh, now what should I do then? So, and what should I do for Europe and for US, etc. So here is a 5-step roadmap for real world evidence that maybe you can use, and I can make also some distinction between Europe and the US. So first step is to define your objective. As I mentioned before, you have to define what are you trying to do now. For FDA, it's mainly what are the claims or indication that you want to support. For Europe, because Europe, as I've said, it's after market, so then it's more what performance or safety aspect do you want to confirm. It's not like to convince your notified body, because normally you already have convinced them. So now you have to define mainly the objectives of your study or of this collection of data that you will be using for real world evidence. Second step, you have to select the right data source. So for FDA, we said that before, we have registries, claims, EHRs, wearables, connected devices. For EU, it's PMCF surveys, hospital data, usage log, literature, and you have to assess for each source that it's complete, it's representative, it's accurate. There is some data quality. It's not like I will not say, let's say the word garbage, but garbage data. No, you have really something that is really clean, that trustable, that we can really use. Third step, you have to plan your design, your study design. So mainly you have to create a protocol, and it's the same for Europe and FDA. So create a protocol, even for retrospective data. So we can have prospective, but we can also have retrospective data. So you have to define a protocol, how you will collect, how you will use all that. Define, as we said, the endpoints. So what are exactly you are expecting at the end. I'm expecting that my device is really doing what I said it will be doing. You have to define also your inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. You have to mitigate any bias with some methodology. So you have really to do this study in the protocol. So plan what you want to do and then do what you are planning. So it's mainly the objective. Then you have in step 4 to define or document your methodology. When you talk about methodologies, that is, how can I keep the traceability? How can I maintain the audit trail, as we said before? Because here there is also this, when you say about traceability and all this, it's also about data privacy, like GDPR or HIPAA in the US. So you have GDPR for general data protection in the Europe, and you have HIPAA for US mainly. So here, this is also something that you have to take into account for compliance. So you cannot just collect data, you have also to verify that there is a consent to use those data, that they are coming from the right source, etc. So you have also to ask for some consent and verify that you are really following GDPR or HIPAA. Then step 5, it's the final step. You have to integrate all this within your regulatory documentation. For FDA, and needs to include that for your 510K or de novo or PMA or whatever, where you will be showing them the benefit risk also. And Europe, it's more about using that, as I said, for PMCF or for updating maybe your clinical evaluation report or updating even your risk management, because I said now you are on the real world. So where the risks evidence that I have defined correct. So this is also something that you have to confirm, because notified body will also ask, can you confirm that? So if you follow normally those 5 steps correctly and with seriousness, I'm sure that then you can really use the real world evidence at your advantage. But as I said, be careful. It's really, there can be some shortcuts that people are using, which really you should not. So now let's list a bit of the pitfalls or the common pitfalls that you really have to avoid. The first one, or the red flag, is mainly that to assume or to think that big data means good data. So it's not because you have a lot of data that all the data is correct. So volume is not validity of excellence, if I can say. So you have really to assess the biases, assess the data provenance, assess all this to really, as I've said, make that FDA or notified bodies are trusting that those data can be really used. Second is also ignoring the regulatory expectations for the documentation. So you cannot just take data and use them. You have really to prove that those data are traceable, that they are correct. Otherwise, notified body will say, no, you have to exclude them because they are not usable. We don't know where it's coming from. We have no traceability at all. So why are you using those data? Next is treating the real world evidence as a shortcut. We talked about that just before, also saying that we have some companies that think that because they are using real world evidence, they don't need to do clinical trials or other things. No, this is just a complement. This will help you to prove that your point mainly about your device. And as we said, for Europe and FDA is different, but mainly it's really helping you to prove that what you are trying to, that your device is mainly trustful, that the claims that we have on the device are really correct. And this is something that can be difficult, how to say that, to do, if I can say, because also of your management, because I know that sometimes you have the pressure of the management. No, we don't have time to do this and that. So use those data and move forward, use it as a shortcut. I mean, what you are doing here, you are just losing time. You are losing more time even, because it will go to a notified body. They will look at it. They will find out it's not correct. They will say where it's coming from. Then you go to a round of question. You will have to pay for it. Don't do that. I mean, convince them that it will cost them more money and more time than if they are really making it correctly from day one, because anyway, you'll have to do it correctly from day one. Then the last one is about data privacy, as we said, about GDPR and HIPAA and all those things. So the objective is that you just don't collect data like that. You have also to follow some rules for collecting those data, ask consent also of usage, verify that you have really the authorization to use that, because notified bodies can also ask those questions. Can you show me that, yes, you had the consent to use those data? And if you don't have anything, then it can be also a no-go for you. And I will be really sorry for that, because as I said, it's something that takes a lot of time, and if at the end you arrive to the end line and they don't let you pass, I mean, it's a tragedy for your company. The other point for this, or common mistake, that we all are quality regulatory affairs, we all are here like wanting to do the thing, but you don't have to, you should not work in silo. You should not work alone. You have really to have a cross-functional team with clinical, with quality and regulatory affairs, with even the people that are doing data science, like if you have AI, etc. So you have to work together, look at those requirements that we mentioned, and try to find a solution to really fulfill those requirements. Because mainly your company is needing that certification. So try really to show them the way to do it correctly, even if it's longer, if there is some delay on your planning. Prefer to have a small delay than to have a big one with higher budget. So show them also that. I mean, it's always what I'm asking to some of those management team. Say, okay, so here is the long way for us, but it's the best, and here is the short way that will lead us to a longer way with the risk also of paying more. Are you accepting to take the risk? So then they have to choose, and usually they choose the right one, I hope. I don't know, but yeah. So I hope you will not have any of those common pitfalls, and that you will be passing that. Okay, so let's wrap up now. If you listen correctly, so you understood now that real-world evidence is transforming how regulators are now evaluating medical devices. So this is only in the condition that you are using it properly, or you are creating a proper system for those data. So FDA is using real-world evidence for mainly innovation, so accelerate innovation, so to make it smarter, faster with the regulatory decision. And Europe is more about continuous check that your device is working correctly. So if you are a QA professional and you are trying to build this new world, if I can say, first you have mainly to build a robust and traceable real-world evidence system that will satisfy the FDA with a good methodology, rigor, etc. And the same data that you are collecting for FDA, you can still feed that with the European EU MDR for the PMCF, clinical evaluation report, etc. etc. So the purpose sometimes is not the same, or you don't have the same vision, but at the end you can do the same thing with the same data. So it's not like you have to double the work or double the things. You just have to double the direction that those data are used for mainly. So so it's not about anymore about collecting data or collecting more data, but it's more about collecting qualitative data or transforming those data in a regulatory grade format, mainly where those data are really clean and everything good enough that they can be used mainly for your submissions. And this is something that is really important because if you are a company that is doing this methodology and collecting those data in the right way, it can be an advantage for your company, a strategic advantage for your company, and it will be helping you to be better in terms of compliance and trustful also for notified bodies or FDA, because they will see that you are really continuing to make the link with the patients, make the link with everything, which also show that you are really caring about the patient. It's not like you are just doing a ticking box somewhere just to tick a box and say, oh, I've done it. No, it's really that use it for really proving that your device is safe, that you are continuously checking and verifying and finding maybe issues early that you can correct immediately instead of waiting maybe some time to find them because you are not making a full monitoring. And specifically, and we talked about that also for the post-marketing clinical follow-up for software devices. For this also, the point is that you have some digital tools that every minute can give you some data. So use those data to really verify if we are going in the right direction or not. So listen again to maybe this previous episode. It was 2 weeks ago, I suppose, where we talked about that. Because yeah, this can be a real advantage for you. So listen again to this episode. Look at again all those methodology that we discussed. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. You can find me on LinkedIn. So go to or Munir Lazouzi or Easy Medical Device page on LinkedIn and ask me any question that you want. If you have also some more subject or more information that you want me to share on the podcast, so let me know. I can or do it myself as a solo episode. I will make my research and then give me my information, or I will invite a guest so that he can also provide those information. So yeah, ask me the question that you want maybe to an answer to, and then I can really try to find those answers or myself, as I said, or with a guest. And again, if you are an expert or if you know an expert that can be also be speaking on the podcast, don't hesitate to share his contact details and the topics that you want to talk about. I will contact him and we can really organize maybe an episode that can be helpful for all of you. And this is the objective of this podcast, to educate you, to help you, to make you understand mainly how medical device can be easy. That's why we have this Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Okay, so thank you very much, and I wish you a really nice day.